in Davidson, North Carolina. It's the Reverend David Buck. Commissioned an artist to create a sculpture for his church, as churches are wont to do, of Jesus. Now, instead of putting Jesus on the cross, which is obviously an important icon in Christianity, he put Jesus wrapped up in a blanket on a park bench, to which some of the people in the area, the church is in a more affluent area, called the police on Jesus because they thought there was a homeless man. So whenever presented with an image of Christ doing what Christ sort of did, they called the cops on him. Now, we don't know for sure that were people in the church that did it. It was people in the neighborhood who may very well have gone to that church. They may not have. So this is our last story is such a great segue to this, because we go from an example of apparently, if what Jeff said is true, a Christian pastor with just blatant hostility to the poor, to a Christian pastor who not only loves the poor, but is like openly challenging the community and pointing out like, hey, we're not doing a good job of loving the poor. There is a bit of an angle, a bit of a disclaimer I want to put on that, or a reservation I want to put on that. But first, I'd love to get you guys' opinion. Stephen, weigh in on this. What do you think?
Well, for me, I mean, the vast majority of Americans are Christian. I imagine that a large portion of people within that community, even if they went to that specific church or not, would label themselves as Christian. But it always comes back to the point with me that they're a Christian when it's convenient for them, and I don't know kind of the type of neighborhood that it's in, whether it's kind of a fairly affluent area or not, but they've seen this homeless person there. It doesn't matter kind of what he looks like, but we don't really want to look at him. He's kind of a bit off-putting. Can somebody, can the police take him away? And I think what the actual pastor did, kind of this work of art, I suppose it was, drawing light to the fact that Americans, and I don't want to sing like Americans because it's just as bad here in the UK as well, but we don't care for the homeless as much as we should, and we just see them as, I mean, I don't, and I'm sure you guys don't, but I'm sure many people do, just see them as kind of non-human, and just they don't want to look at them, and they want to kind of put them into a corner and not think about them, and not want to kind of think about even trying to help them. And that seems to have been the case with this.
And I love the twist, right? This guy, creates a statue, or I should say buys a statue for about 22 grand, I believe it was said in the NPR story. I love the twist that it is Jesus, and that it makes people in the neighborhood incredibly uncomfortable, right? And you're probably wondering why. Like, why would a statue of Jesus? Oh, it's because he looks like a homeless person sleeping on a bench. Now, like Jordan had pointed out, this is a far cry from the usual depictions of Jesus, right? And so the reaction from the community, there was one person that said that, look, this is an insulting depiction of the Son of God, and that, what appears to be a hobo curled up on a bench demeans the neighborhood. And to that I say, you missed the point, dude. Seriously. And of course another neighbor in that area said the statue just creeps him out. Why? What's the matter? I thought you guys loved Jesus.
With that whole kind of creeping out sort of thing, when you break it down, how does a kind of the Son of God, a bearded man, lying down on a bench with a blanket over him, how does that creep him out more than that same person being nailed to a cross? How is that any more creepy?
That's a good point.
It's ridiculous.
But another point. That is a fantastic point. And another thing that I kind of want to hit on is that this sort of shows how we view the homeless, right? People are creeped out. They're calling the cops because they're afraid of homeless people. And this sort of illustrates that visceral fear and misunderstanding we have here in America for people who have fallen on hard times, And it's sort of amazing how we have that sort of just misunderstanding. Like, we dehumanize the homeless people, and we've done so many different stories that show that. Once again, the Democrat beating in the shopping carts with a sledgehammer. The recent, actually, Shanisha Taylor story, where she was homeless, and living in her car and made a horrible mistake, and now they're trying to charge her with a felony and put her in prison for 8 years for being homeless. So, we have this just ultimate dehumanization and fear and misunderstanding of homeless people, and it's so sort of disgusting to see.
I think one of the reasons why kind of people do kind of dehumanize or just don't want to kind of care for the homeless is that they think that it's their own fault, they've gotten themselves into this situation, and therefore it's kind of their own fault and they should have to deal with it. And I can imagine for a large number of homeless people that they have gotten themselves into their own situation, you know, whether it's through kind of drugs or another form of addiction or whatever, fine. Just because it's, you know, whether it's their own fault or it isn't their own fault, even if it is their own fault, doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and help them. I mean, as a Christian especially, like, that should be your main driving goal, is to try and help better the lives of other people. And so it doesn't matter if it's their own fault or their own wrongdoings that got them in this situation.
Right,
you
right.
Want to help.
And it's these Christians, it shows how some of these affluent Christians, how little they know about Jesus. Now, apparently Jesus was a vagrant for all intents and purposes. He wasn't a rich man. He chased the bankers from the temple with a whip. He did not like wealth, which kind of badass, right? We were talking before the show, Jordan and I. He went and fashioned his own whip, and he's like, all right, I'm going to clean house, right? He told everybody to sell their possessions, take care of the poor, take care of the homeless, the sick, all of that. And so the idea that this statue demeans the neighborhood and demeans Jesus, no. It's people like, you know, it's the people like Brian Fisher and the people that are afraid of this, you know, this depiction of Jesus. You demean Jesus by not following the very things that he's said to have taught.
You said for all intents and purposes, you know, Jesus was a vagrant. That's true. But what is so just the sad irony for me as a Christian, but at the same time, why I'm so glad this guy did this, is that it's not only was Jesus a vagrant for all intents and purposes, he was a vagrant, period. And he even went out of his way to state that and make that a part of his identity. So there are, of course, there's the metaphorical things where Jesus says, whenever, you know, in the day of judgment, people, Jesus will come and say, hey, I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty, you gave me water, and people will say, when do we do that? It says, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine. So, you know, a lot of times that verse gets misapplied. Jesus is talking about other Christians here, but the guy's sleeping on a bench at a church. He's probably a Christian. So even if you want to throw that caveat out there, these people still don't have a leg to stand on. You know, it says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. So there's that. That's part of the Christian mission. That's what, you know, Christ himself says judgment is going to be based on. But you cut it away from all theology. Just the simple statement. There's a part where someone comes up to Jesus. This is in Luke 9, verse 57. They're going down the road. Someone says to him, I'll follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says to him, foxes have dens, and the birds in the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Basically saying, yeah, you can follow me, but I'm homeless. And if you're going to follow me in the tradition of first century Palestinian, the way rabbis worked and stuff like that, you took on literally the mantle of your rabbi. He's saying, I'm homeless. Following me means you have to be homeless. And if you're going to say you'll follow me anywhere, you got to do it right now. You don't get to go bury your dad. You don't get to go take care of your financial issues. Let's go. You said you'll follow me anywhere. I'm homeless. Let's do it. He made that not only part of his mission, that was part of his identity. He said, Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, is a homeless man. That's what it means to worship Jesus, is to say we worship a homeless man. These people are calling the cops on a homeless man. So, like, some people may point out, hey, this statue cost $22,000. How many actual homeless people could that have helped? That's a solid point. That's a true point.
Absolutely.
But why I really like this, though, is that whenever, you know, the guy spent the money to make a point, an excellent point, and this is part of Christian theology. This is why we build cathedrals, is that I think this is a modern interpretation of that that's still relevant in our context. Cathedrals are meant to worship. That's why they're beautiful. They're all meant to point towards God. The architecture means something, but over the centuries we lose that, and they just become pretty buildings. So this guy takes that same concept, that architecture and, you know, permanent things can be made purposeful to worship, because that money was spent on something that made a very, very strong point and was effective. And not only that, but it's such a great reminder to Christians, because whenever they called the cops on this homeless man, he's still there because he's a fixture. like he's bolted down to the ground. Like, that this idea that our mission, like that Jesus is always with us, that we constantly have this obligation to take care of the poor. This statue makes that point. And the other thing I want to talk about is the tautology that you guys got into this of homeless Jesus. This is how bad, and like Stephen pointed out, it's not just Americans, but yeah, this happened in America. I'm part of the American church, so that's who I get to talk bad about. This we don't, you don't have to say, oh, that's Jesus on the cross. You see a crucifixion, you say, that's Jesus. Well, Jesus was on the cross for several hours, and it's a very important part of the faith, but it's all part of the incarnation event. The other part of the incarnation event was that for the entirety of his adult ministry, so from whenever he gave up his life and construction work to take on his what he felt was his mission as the Messiah, he was homeless. So he was homeless for like 3 years. But we qualify that. We don't say, oh, that's Jesus. We say, oh, that's homeless Jesus, even though that was a much more permanent part of his identity than his time on the cross. And it's great. It's a lot of money for artwork, but hey, I think God likes art, and I really like what this pastor's doing. I think it sends a great message.
Not to take away from anything that you've just said, as wonderful as it was, but why do we care what Jesus taught? Why can't we just help this person no matter what your religion is? People shouldn't have to care about what does the Bible say or what does my pastor say, or whether it's a defamation of their son of God or whatever. Why can't they just help him? It just
right. If you're if you have to rely on a set of teachings, a book for your morality, maybe you should check yourself as a person. And look, like, there are good people of all different faiths, and there are good people with no faith. And so these people don't necessarily have to ascribe to any sort of religious belief to do good things. They just do good things for the sake of doing good things. So.
Yeah, and that's I totally understand. All right, so a lot of little old ladies go to churches. Maybe there's some shady vagrants out there. You don't want the little old lady to get mugged. The Christian answer then should not be call the police. The Christian answer should be go in there with a group of 2 or 3 people so nothing's going to happen to you, and help the guy. And see why he's homeless, see why he's on the bench, and take care of him because he's coming to the church for help. Why are you calling the police on him instead of helping him? Now, maybe the people that called the police weren't members of the church. We don't know that. But to Stephen's point, okay, so you're not a member of the church. Maybe you're not even a Christian. Help the guy. It's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter what faith you are. This guy needs some help. You don't need to call the cops on him.
Right, and there is one other point too that's brought up by some of our viewers and everything, is that there is this fear of the poor because of being mentally ill, right? That's another reason that we should help these people. Like, we should have mental health facilities available, and it goes back to Reagan shutting down those mental health facilities in order to save a few bucks and saying, oh, well, you're mentally ill? Good luck to you, sir. You're going to end up in our prison system, which unfortunately that's where they end up. So that's another sort of failing in our society that we have, is that, we're scared of, a lot of people are scared of homeless people because they're mentally ill, because mental illness is not understood, and it's also not dealt with in a way that's constructive to everyone, to society. It's more of, I'm scared of them, so get them out of here. So it's a destructive mentality, and it's not helpful to anyone.